Hello world, it's Dave again, and then this time, more specifically, hello Alice. Alice, you took the time to write me, so I'm taking the time to make a video to answer the specific questions that you had regarding teaching in Japan. Uh, and yours is fairly concise, so I should be able to hammer this out for you real fast. I won't make it some huge thesis. So let's get started. Let's answer the questions that you have. Let's see. Thank you for your fantastic videos. Oh, no problem. I enjoy making them. Let's see. I'm also thinking about applying, but I'm worried about the actual teaching part of the position. How is it? It's funny. That's a really good question. It is good because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the teaching aspect over here. Because when I first got into it, I was like, wow, it's going to be really intense. I hope that they have crazy, crazy training that I get through when I go over here. And that was how I believed it would be until I arrived and until I went through their training. And right up until the point that I was in the classrooms, I was fairly anxious about how I would do in the classroom because even in the training, I was like, oh man, you don't know. I mean, I really just got to get the actual experience itself. But it is like this. Let's separate it into a couple of different categories first into the types of teaching that you have. So if you are in a, call it below junior high school setting, there's going to be a lot less grammar. There's going to be an emphasis on really basic concepts. And so you mentioned in your email, you said, I'm not bad. I've got pretty good English, but I'm not confident with my grammar skills, maybe at a teaching level. Well, at these more basic levels of teaching outside of junior high school, very little of it is actually grammar. It's more a ton of basic conversational Japanese and call it vocabulary, just basic conversational stuff and vocabulary that you're introducing the kids to the language. And I think anyone would flourish there because if you've grown up speaking English, then of course you have a fantastic vocabulary, and of course you're completely prodigious in your ability to have a conversation. Um, so no worries if you end up just working for one of these, working for with a younger group of kids, which happens a ton of the time. So don't worry about that. Just go in, go through the training, have an open mind, do the best that you can, but be confident that when you get into those classes, it's more understanding how to have a full lesson plan, just all the different things that you're going to do, all the different activities, but it's not that you need to necessarily be a Harvard graduate of English studies to be able to get through that. It's more that you need to have a good amount of energy because these kids are going to be young, they're going to have a lot of energy, you got to be positive to keep their attention and just have a good time. And that sounds kind of cliche, but it's true. The kids will really be reflective of your energy in that setting. So if you're just positive, you develop, like some fun activities that take up the time and kind of target the whatever basic conversational stuff and vocab that you're going through, you're going to be okay. And most training will be something that's provided to give you what those lesson plans will be like. So if you don't have experience yet making a lesson plan, they'll train you somewhat to be able to do it. Let's see. So that then moves on to where I am. I'm in junior high school. So in junior high school, you start to get more grammar. But this is where things change a whole bunch as a result of that grammar. So because there's more grammar and grammar is difficult, you're not going to be expected to teach that grammar to the kids. It's going to be the Japanese teachers who are teaching most of the grammar in Japanese to the students. So you might not even need to know what that grammar is. Now, I don't advocate ignorance. I think if you see that you're going in for one of your classes that day and that the topic is, present perfect, or you've got to do the passive voice, which is hilarious. I just did a class on passive voice. This is an anecdote, but I do my own writing. I write fiction, and passive voice is one of the most horrendous things you could ever put into fiction because it really disrupts the flow of what you're talking about. And here I am teaching it to them. It feels strange. I mean, I guess it's like you want all your tools in your tool belt, even if they're not the ones that you should use to write well. But anyways, that's aside the point. The point is that the grammar is going to be handled mostly by the actual teachers, and you should do due diligence and make sure that you know what the grammar is, but don't panic because it's not going to be your responsibility to communicate that to them. They'll want you to be aware of it, but not that you would have to teach the whole class. Um, then let's move along, just moving away from that. What is teaching junior high schools? What does teaching in junior high schools usually encompass for me? So I'll take you through two different scenarios because this is something I talk about in a lot of my videos, but every school is different, even if you're teaching at two public schools. It's all the people that you are working with that are going to decide the experience that you have, and it's going to change depending on those sort of people that you have in each school. So at one school, here's an example. So I've got grades 1, 2, and 3, which is like 8, 9, and 10 would be the Canadian equivalent. So I go into a class and I see beforehand when I've come in on my lesson plan that we're going to be covering chapter 9 and this particular grammar point that they want them to understand. So usually a teacher will approach me and say, this is what the grammar point is, and I have these exercises that I want the kids to do. So this is what I'm going to cover with the kids today. And I'll go, okay, I understand. Thank you for informing me of that. You know, I'm now aware of what the lesson is going to be like today. And we go in and they start teaching. They usually start talking to them in Japanese after we've done a greeting where you to ask them, how's the weather? How are they doing? They respond or completely ignore you, depending on the mood of the class. And they'll start to go into their grammar point. You're just chilling off at the side. And then you'll start to do some new vocabulary. So they want the students to repeat after you and say some vocabulary. And so they learn the vocabulary for that day. Then they will often have a dialogue or a bit of reading that is in that section that they're working on, and they'll want the kids to learn that dialogue through you. So they'll say, will you read word for word with the kids? You say a word, they say a word, you say a word, they say a word, or repeat after you for each word and then do full sentences. So at one point in this class so far, you've done new vocabulary with them, and then you've gone into to read this dialogue, leading this dialogue through the class. And so you get through that. And then the teacher may have prepared at that point a conversational activity where they have you they explain a conversation that's going to work for this like game or dialogue that they have that's going to practice this conversation. They get you to have the kids repeat after you for all the different lines of the dialogue, and then the kids then try and have this dialogue among themselves out in the class, and you're then expected to go out into the class and practice with some of these students the dialogue that you're having or that they're having. Sorry. And then once you're done that dialogue, they'll probably finish up making a few more grammar points or explaining the grammar in a little more detail to them. And then you're through the class. And then that's like a really involved class as far as that style is concerned, where you're kind of a bit more on the back burner, but they're having you do stuff. But then there's other classes where they may just have a little bit of grammar, a class test, and you're barely involved with the class at all, except for maybe to wander around and see how they're filling out worksheets where there's English answers on them that you can then correct and help them with. So at most active in that kind of case at this school, I do a little bit of vocabulary. I do a bit of interaction with a dialogue and then reading dialogue with the students and correcting a few things. On my laziest day, we'll call it, I would go in, they'd have a test to do, they'd have a grammar point to be made, and you kind of have to stand passively while they do the test. They have a grammar point where they have a worksheet. You could kind of mark that, and then maybe they do, maybe they don't, but the teachers arrange for them to ask you a few questions. And so maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't. But for that day, you're actually pretty under the radar. And just because of the nature of the class that day, you aren't so much involved. That's one school that I have. Then you go to this other school that I have where they expect me to be more actively involved. And so it would be very different in that class, where in that class, let me run through something that I've done. So recently we did the passive tense. And so I went into that class and I wrote a whole bunch of passive tense examples on the board before the class started. And before I went to the class, I prepared a worksheet where I had sentences. First, it was kind of like a level up thing. You start with something a little more easily done and then something that progresses into something a little more difficult. And so the first thing was incompleted sentences, where I've started the sentence, finished it, but then I want them to complete the middle of the sentence with options A, B, or C that's just below the sentence, which is correct to complete this sentence in the passive tense. And so an active sentence would be, I watched the fireworks. But let's see, I would say to make it passive would be the fireworks were watched by the people, where you have to like say something is being done to the. Anyways, I won't get into the grammar of that. The way that the worksheet was set up was an incomplete sentence, a bunch of different options that could complete the sentence, and they needed to choose the correct couple of words that would then make the sentence passive. So that's one worksheet that I made, and then another worksheet I made that was another level up from that was simple sentences that were in the active tense, and I wanted them to change them to the passive tense. And so I've started the class, we practiced a few passive sentences, then I hand out the first worksheet, I read through the first worksheet, having them repeat after me all the different words. The Japanese sensei then explains the worksheet in more detail after I've explained it in English, just to get them to hear what the English sounds like, even if they don't necessarily comprehend. Then he explains the worksheet, excuse me, and then they go about trying to do it. And if they have some questions, if you've learned a little bit more Japanese, a basic question in Japanese, you might be able to help them with. But you can go around the room as they're doing it as they're working on the worksheet. And this is a funny topic that I think you could almost dedicate a separate video to, but everybody says it should be an absolutely immersive environment when you're in the classroom, and you should not speak Japanese. Japanese should not be a part of the class. But I stand by my guns when I say that this is absolutely ridiculous, because half of the class is already in Japanese because the Japanese teacher is explaining the grammar points or explaining to them in Japanese how the worksheet should be done. So yes, you want to speak English as much as possible, but sometimes if they just do not understand and you're wandering around marking a worksheet, if you can use the littlest bit of Japanese to get them to comprehend what it is that they need to do in English, then I use it, then I do it. But that's kind of getting off topic here. So I've had the first worksheet out where the guys explained it. We go around marking the worksheet. We then, after the worksheet is done, the Japanese sensei or myself will then say, let's see if we can get the answers from this. And then we go through all the answers on the worksheet, and then I hand them out the next one. And you kind of refresh, repeat. You explain, you read through all the different sentences. I explain in English what I want them to do. He then explains in Japanese what to do, so it's very, very clear, and then I can go around the classroom and help them again. So you can tell I'm a lot more hands-on in that class, where I've organized the lesson in terms of what's exactly going to happen, in order of the lesson. I'm talking a lot more. I'm just way, way more active in that environment at that school, and that's just the way that they want to do it there. So it depends. So I've talked about the outside of junior high school, the level below where I work. I've talked about a setting where it's maybe a little bit a more passive role that you take on. And I've talked about how you can be a little bit more actively involved. But in none of these scenarios do you need to be an English god. That's where the final verdict arrives. In none of these situations do you need to be a professor. You should always be trying to educate yourself, make yourself a little bit more knowledgeable, but it would be the rarest of occasions that you actually would find yourself thinking, oh no, I don't know the English grammar for this. And I have never been faced with that scenario yet. And any time that I've been concerned, I've always been because I receive my lesson plans before I get to the school, been able to, if I'm a little hazy on it, or just don't have a clue, so I'm being completely honest. They mention a tense that I may speak that way, but I didn't know that was a tense, Unless you were a professor, you wouldn't know these things. I just educate myself before the class, and this ends up being kind of a funny thing, but I'm learning Japanese while I'm here, but in many ways I'm learning English as well, because you get a deeper understanding of your own language. You just, I would say, intuitively use English without really knowing the bits and bytes behind it, and this gives you a chance to really get into it. And I like to. I'm working on writing fiction right now. I've got a book that I'm writing, and it's really helped with that, because I've been like, oh, I understand these different use of tenses and these other grammatical forms that I sort of do, in, like I say, intuitively, but I've never really did the brass tacks on before. So this has been really, really helpful. But you'll be able to make your way through it. That's kind of the final point here. So I hope this has been useful. If you have any more questions, please do just drop me another email. I can make another video. This has gone far longer than I intended it to, but oh well. Um, yeah, thanks for checking out my videos, Alice. I hope this is helpful. Like I like to say, until we meet again, ciao for now. Thanks for tripping with Dave. Peace.